The morning air was thick with dust and silence as I swept. It's the hallway of the old villa where my mother had worked for years, and now so did I not. Because I wanted to, but because things at home had gotten tight after Dad left or vanished or maybe just gave up. We never spoke of him again, and that was enough to leave the word father feeling hollow in my mouth. The wooden floors creaked with every movement as if whispering secrets from decades ago, and the house itself stood like it had something to hide. I was wiping down the mirrors in the guest bedroom when I heard it, a sound so soft it could have been wind or breath, but it had weight to it. The door to the master suite wasn't closed all the way, and curiosity tugged at me like an old friend. I didn't want to know, but something in me needed to say, pushed the door just enough, and the sight made my stomach tighten. There was my mother, her long hair falling over bare shoulders, her smile unfamiliar, soft, vulnerable, and with her was a man I had seen only once or twice around the estate, tall, charming too, polished to belong in our world, and he was touching her like she was the most fragile, precious thing he had ever held. He didn't mean to gasp, but I did, and her eyes flew to mine, wide with horror, with guilt, with something like sorrow. She pulled the blanket around herself, and he stood still, caught not in shame, but in calm boldness, and he said, "You must be Eva. She talks about you all the time." And my mother whispered, "Please don't tell anyone, Ran." Then I didn't want to hear more, didn't want to understand or try to unravel the mess that had just spilled into my life, but the image wouldn't leave me. It haunted my steps, my sleep, my thoughts, until I found myself lingering by the staircase every time she came home, waiting for an explanation. She never gazed past, and she avoided me like I was a wound she couldn't tend, and I hated that. I hated being shut out. So one evening I followed her. She left dressed simply, but with that glow that comes from being wanted, and I watched as she met him again, not in the grand house, but by the lake near Kaka. By the lake near Kaka, the edge of the woods where the world grew quiet and the air turned sweet. She laughed there like she was 20 again, like the weight of the world hadn't pressed down on her for years. And I saw then what I didn't see before. This wasn't a betrayal, it was a survival. She was loving in the shadows because the world never gave her light. And he gave her warmth she'd been starved of for so long, and I understood, not all at once, but in pieces, in glances, in memories that resurfaced of her crying late at night, holding old pictures, talking to Noah Nee. Didn't confront her. Instead, I began helping more, taking her load, making dinner, folding laundry, and I left little notes with hearts on napkins, like she used to do for me as a kid, until one day she came to my room, sat on my bed, and held my hand. She said, "You saw." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "Don't, Bethan." She told me his name, Marcus, that he wasn't just a lover, but a man who waited for her, who respected her, who held her with both hands and never once let her feel small. And in that moment, she didn't look like my mother. She looked like a woman reclaiming her story, and I loved her. Even more months passed, and their love wasn't a secret anymore. Not to me, not to those who mattered, and eventually not to the world, because she stopped hiding, and he stopped caring who saw, and it didn't matter that people whispered or judged, because she walked taller and smiled wider, and when he looked at her, you could feel the heat of every moment. They had Sheretza meets at night. I'd pass their room and hear music, soft jazz, or maybe old Bollywood tunes, and their laughter would drift through the hallway, and I'd close my eyes, knowing that love wasn't always neat or planned or perfect, but when it was real, it deserved to pretend. Somewhere in all that mess, in all that unexpected truth, I found my own courage to want something more than survival, to hope for something deep and wild and honest, because if she could be brave enough to love again, so could I. So when he came, the boy who delivered books every Tuesday with ink-stained fingers and a crooked smile, I didn't turn away. I let him in, and maybe that's how new stories begin. Not in secrets, but in the decision to stop hiding and to finally live. His name was Aryan, and he always arrived with two things: a stack of books and a question for me. Sometimes it was about the story he was reading. Sometimes it was about my favorite line from a poem. Sometimes it was just, "How are you?" but it was always something that made me feel like I was being seen, not just noticed, but really seen at. First, I answered quietly, not trusting my voice, not trusting that someone like him could be curious about. Someone like me, a girl in a worn maid uniform with more silence than sparkle, but he kept showing up, kept asking, kept listening, and one afternoon he handed me a notebook and said, "Ah, this is for you. Write in it, draw in it, fill it with whatever you cannot say out loud." He opened it that night and wrote 3 words I want more. I didn't ask about it the next day or the day after, but he watched me with eyes that waited gently, patiently. And when I finally whispered, "I think I like you," he just smiled and said, "I was hoping you did." Way didn't touch. Not at first, it wasn't that kind of rush. It was slow and blooming, like something ancient and careful and full of wonder. We sat on benches under old trees and shared our favorite lines. He kissed the back of my hand once, and it felt more intimate than anything I had ever known. My mother's world was changing. To Marcus wanted to take her away to Italy, to a place where she could paint again, where her mornings would begin with warm bread and her nights with candlelight and slow jazz. She was terrified. She told me she didn't know how to choose between love and responsibility. And I looked at her and said, "Maybe it's time you choose." Youthtown began to talk louder. Now the other maids, the gardeners, the neighbors' whispers turned into pointed questions, and judgment dripped from polite smiles. One woman even said to me, "Is your mother really going to run away with that man like some storybook girl?" And I looked her in the eye and said, "Maybe she is. Maybe she finally will." Me mother stood firm, though she kept going to work, kept walking past their stairs, and one morning she took off the thin gold band she still wore from the man who left us, and she said, "I'm done being loyal to Ghost." Marcus came by the house that day with tulips, and an envelope inside were tickets and a letter. Not a proposal, but an invitation to choose herself. And that night she cried in my lap, like she was a girl again, unsure and scared and full of dreams that never had room to grow. And I held her and said, "I'll be okay, you go." She left 2 weeks later with one suitcase and a smile that almost broke me, and Arian was there beside me, watching the taxi disappear into the sun. He said, "You're brave like her." And I said, "Not yet, but maybe soon." After she left, the house felt different, lighter, quieter, but not empty. I filled the silence with music she loved, and I wrote in the notebook every night words that smelled like hope and ink. And in those pages I found myself layer by layer. Arian kissed me under the jacaranda tree one dusky evening while purple flowers rained on us, and that kiss, it was like the pages of every book we ever shared, folding into one sentence that said, "I choose you." And I grew slowly like vines around an old fence, steady and sure. And when I finally told him I loved him, he didn't speak. He just pulled me close and rested his forehead to mine, breathing me in like a promise. Me mother wrote letters from Florence filled with colors and smells and memories she never thought she'd get to make. She said she paints every day, and Marcus dances with her in the kitchen, and she dreams of us joining them one day. And I think we will someday. Maybe not yet, but soon, because sometimes the best stories begin when you stop pretending the past is your home and you dare to write something new. And this is how we learn to love. Okay. Without shame, to walk without hiding, to speak without fear, because her secret lover was never meant to be secret, and my quiet heart was never meant to stay silent.